All right, y'all. Today we're talking about energy flow, and it's 3-2 in your notes. So it's going to cover food chains, food webs, and energy pyramids. So whenever you think about a food chain, what do you think about? Getting ate? Yes. So something eating something else. What about plants? Plants at the beginning of the food chain or food web. Yep. And they're gonna how are they gonna get their food though? From the sun. Yes. All right. So in your notes, we are on 3 through 11, and we're gonna start off talking about plants, which are the producers for a food chain or food web. So producers are also called autotrophs in a food chain or food web. And you guys already know about one type of autotroph, which is what? We're autotroph? No, we're heterotroph. What can make its own food? Plants. Yes. Yes. So photosynthesis was the key word. So photosynthesis is one type of way to make our food. The other type of way of producing food is called chemosynthesis. So for number 3, you should have in the first blank autotroph, second blank photosynthesis, third blank chemosynthesis. Now photosynthesis. What do plants use to do photosynthesis? Sunlight. Good. What else? Water. What else? Is that it? Yeah. Sunlight, water, soil. Good. And CO2. All right, and it's going to use those chemicals, sunlight, water, and CO2, to make carbohydrates. What's another name for carbohydrates? Carbs, sugars, and glucose. Good. Chemosynthesis is going to perform a similar process, except they're going to use chemicals instead of light and CO2. So you guys have light plus CO2 plus water and chlorophyll yields what? What should go in the blank for number 4? What does it make? It's carbohydrates. Yes. Gonna make carbohydrates. Sugars, glucose. All right, so let's move on. So photosynthesis versus chemosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide and water and produces sugars, and it happens in plants, produce, and bacteria. Some produce and some bacteria. Chemosynthesis is going to take carbon dioxide, water, plus another chemical compound called hydrogen sulfide, and it's going to produce carbohydrates as well, plus the sulfuric acid, and it's only going to happen with bacteria deep in the ocean where there are no producers available. And we just talked about this. Photosynthesis uses sunlight to make glucose. It happens in plants, algae, which are protists, and some bacteria. Whereas chemosynthesis is going to happen with bacteria at hydrothermal vents deep in the ocean. It's going to take inorganic compounds instead of sunlight, and it's going to use that to make sugars. All right, let's switch to consumers. Consumers are also called heterotrophs. Yes, that's what we are. Now, which type of consumer are we?
We're carnivores.
So you think we're carnivores? Do we eat only meat? We are both. Yes, so we're not herbivores because herbivores eat only plants. So then we are both. Which one of these words look like it mean? Which one of these words means both? Omnivores. Yes. All right. So types of heterotrophs. Carnivores are going to eat only meat. Name an example of a carnivore. Dinosaur. Some dinosaurs. The T-Rex dinosaur.
Oh, I got one.
Which one? What? Well, we don't eat just meat. We just said we're both. Yes. Sharks. Yes. Cats. Omnivores eat both meat and plants. What's it? All right, so that's us. Good. What else would be an example other than humans? What might also be it? Huh? Dogs? Most dogs eat only meat. I guess if we feed them food, dog food that has both, then we're kind of creating that. What about bears? They eat berries and um they eat meat. So that would be my other example. Herbivores eat only plants. What would be an example of that? Turtles, vegetarians for humans, yes. So humans can actually change because you might have some that are, but as a group, we are mostly omnivores. But some people are vegan or vegetarian and they want to only eat plants, so they're going to be herbivores. All right, detritivores are scavengers that eat dead stuff. What's an example of a scavenger? Vultures, yes. All right, and then lastly, decomposers break down dead stuff. That one isn't on your worksheet, so if you don't know what a decomposer is, you can write it down. But we just finished talking about fungi, so hopefully you know what a decomposer is. Fungi and bacteria. Fungi and bacteria are our only examples of decomposers. All right, and so what we can do with all this information, y'all, is we can turn this into a food chain or a food web that shows the direction of energy flow when one organism eats another organism. And one thing you need to know is energy is going to flow only in one direction, and it's always going to go from the producer to the consumer. All right, so the producer has to be the one that gets his energy from the sun and has to be the one to start off a food chain. And then the producer is going to directly or indirectly feed all or produce the energy that all the other levels use. Yes, ma'am. All right, so with a food chain, the arrows between the words indicate the energy flow. And the arrows are always going to point towards the organism getting the energy. All right, so in your example, in this example, before we get to yours, the arrow points from the sun to the producer because the producer gets its energy from the sun, and then from the consumer, from the producer to the consumer, because the consumer gets its energy from the producer. All right, so notice the arrow always points to the organism getting the energy. So on your example, you have the sun, a plant, and a rabbit. Your arrows should point from the sun to the plant because the plant is getting its energy from the sun. And then from the plant to the rabbit because the rabbit is getting its energy from the plant. All right, so go ahead and draw your arrows in. All right. And when we overlap or link food chains together, because a food chain just shows one, it just shows one little ecological relationship. We know that in an ecosystem, there's multiple relationships. So a rabbit doesn't just eat one type of grass; it might eat several types of grass. So then there might be a different food chain for each type of grass. A rabbit just isn't eaten by a hawk or an eagle. It's eaten by several different things. So we need a food chain to show all of those relationships. So what we have is called a food web. And a food web is overlapping or linked food chain. And in yours, this one has two food chains. So from the sun to the grass to the rabbit, actually more than two, because that could be one. From the sun to the grass to the rabbit, that could be one food chain, right? All right, from the sun to the grass to the rabbit to the, what does I have on this? Is it eagle or hawk? Eagle, that would be another food chain. And then from the sun to the grass to the rabbit to the fox, that would be a third food chain. All right, so we have at least 3 food chains in this diagram. All right, so make sure you get 8 and 9 from this one because the definition of food web is also on here. All right, so let's look at this food web. Can we put the rabbit after the sun? No, why not? Yes, the producer always comes before the consumer. All right, so a rabbit is a consumer. It's a heterotroph, so it can't make the food or use the energy from the sun to make food for the other organisms. And I'll go back to that slide. So consumers are all heterotrophs, so they cannot be placed after the sun. What about a fungi or a mushroom? Can we place that after the sun? A mushroom. So this is number 10. Well, I'm on number 11. What about a mushroom? Can it be placed after the sun? Can a mushroom make its own food? Really? We just learned all fungi were heterotrophs. So no, because all fungi are heterotrophs, so they are consumers as well. So decomposers or mushroom, which are mushrooms, are all heterotrophs. They also cannot be placed after the sun on the food chain. They are only autotrophs can be placed after the sun. All right. So let me go back a second to this slide. And this is kind of what we are working on today with our food chain and food webs worksheet. So in a food chain or food web, we have what's called a trophic level. And trophic levels are just what we call feeding levels. It's just what's their role in that particular food chain or food web. So grasses and plants are always going to be producers. So they're always going to form the first link in the food chain or food web. And then the organism that eats or feeds directly on the producer is called the primary consumer. Primary means first. Consumer means it's going to be the first organism to eat or consume the plant. So in this case, the grasshopper is the example of the primary consumer. The primary consumer is consumed by the secondary consumer. All right. So in this case, the secondary consumer is a frog. And then the secondary consumer is consumed by the tertiary consumer. And in this case, secondary means second, tertiary means third. Tertiary consumer in this case is the snake is going to eat the secondary consumer. And then we can also have one more. We can have the quaternary consumer. Quaternary means fourth consumer. So in this case, the hawk is the quaternary consumer. And then the decomposer is going to eat the break down the hawk. Now, one thing about this is the decomposer can actually be anywhere on this food chain except as a producer. So it can be primary consumer, secondary, tertiary, or quaternary because it can break down any of these things. So if you have a tree that's dead, so let's say a tree fell over in the forest and a lot of mushrooms are going to grow in that tree and break it down, then that makes the mushrooms a primary consumer. All right, so if this grasshopper died and this bacteria is going to break it down, then this bacteria would be secondary consumer. All right, so decomposers can go anywhere, and organisms can move levels on a food chain or food web. So, for example, this hawk can feed directly on this frog, and so that would make the hawk a tertiary consumer instead of a quaternary consumer. Humans, we can eat grass and be primary consumers, or we can eat grasshoppers and be secondary consumers, or we can eat frogs and we're tertiary consumers. Yeah, and we can eat snakes because people eat snakes too, and we could be quaternary consumers. All right, so we can also move levels, but we cannot ever be producers. All right. So let's look at your food web activity that we're going to do. Or just the worksheet.